Hey guys, welcome back to the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. I'm here with Bridget the Bunny and Davy the Dragon. We've just been talking about Chapter 8, which was really intense. Tobias the Piper faced some freaky demon in the woods. He doesn't even know what it was. He played his pipes to put a mother's bear to sleep and figured, hey, if I can do all this stuff, maybe I can win the tournament. So he's off to the town of Hanover to enter the tournament. Whoever wins gets to marry the princess. Let's find out what happens in Chapter 9, Friend or Foe. Tobias was not the only person in the forest who was determined to win the hand of the princess. There was a very small town, or hamlet, 12 miles east of Hamlin, where once lived a sharp-eyed boy and his wise father. But upon returning from their last trip to Hamlin, the father had died of illness brought on by traveling in the rain as they sought men to help them rescue a girl from the goblins. But the sharp-eyed boy lived on, an orphan, for his mother had died when she bore him. Of course, you recall the name of this boy was Matthias, and he was very much alive. Since the day of his father's death, Matthias had sworn revenge on the goblins, for he believed it was their hurried travel through the rain which had caused his father too much strain, so that he succumbed to pneumonia and died before he saw his son come to adulthood. Having no other source of income, as he was an orphan, Matthias spent his days in the forest, hunting. He had inherited from his father a great hunting bow and a buck knife by which he skinned and carved the meat from whatsoever beast crossed his path. For 3 years he had lived thus in the forest, summer or winter, day or night, except when there were county fairs and bazaars. At the festivals, he came out from the forest to wrestle for prize money. Matthias learned also to fight with his fists and then with sticks. Soon he accepted invitations to jousts. Arriving early and staying late at tournaments, he took every chance for training with the other great warriors. By this method, he gained as much skill with the sword as he had with the bow, and his skill with both could not be matched. So determined was he to get revenge on the goblins. He was patient also, biding his time and building his strength with exercise, such as running all day and all night, 50 miles at a time, eating only what food came within his reach as he ran. Upon the hills he cast boulders from the going up of the sun to the going down of the sun. Assuredly there was no other young man in the fiefdom whose arms and back were as strong and sinewy and powerful, for he was not afraid to face any beast of the wild unarmed, and alone, and at night. And so the fame of Matthias began to spread. No habiter of the wilds was so clever, so silent, and so swift, so determined in his pursuit, and so dangerous at close quarters. Thus, when the men of the taverns in the fiefdom wagered on who might win the princess's hand, they made one simple bet: Matthias or not Matthias? And those were even odds, despite the fact that dozens of men from within and without the realm had sworn to enter the tournament. But how shall Tobias fare against such a hunter as Matthias? Now Matthias was also in the forest until the day before the tournament began. His lateness in arriving gave all the other men hopes that they might have a chance to win. Some began to murmur whether Matthias had taken ill, or that he had died, or met with some disaster which prevented his coming. So the whole of Hanover waited upon his arrival. But on this morning, which was the morning of the eve of the tournament, 2 young men traveled the road east and north to Hanover. Tobias came upon Matthias, shaving himself by the creek, and Tobias stopped and took occasion to shave his meager beard also, with the knife used for carting wood. "Ho there!" Matthias said, for that's how hunters greet people in the deepest, booming voice they can make. "Hello," said Tobias, stooping to get a handful of water from the stream. Matthias stood up from shaving and wiped his face with a hand towel. His jaw was square, his eyes bright, and his hair fair and yellow. His hands looked as if he'd been smithing for a solid decade, sinewy and bulging. Narrow at the waist and wide at the shoulders, he was clad in leather breeches from foot to waist, his chest bare for washing. He nodded at Tobias. "Come here for the tournament, are you?" Tobias nodded back and began to shave. "Ha, ha, ha!" The tournament laughed loudly as he thumped his chest with his iron fist. Then he reached for his gray wool tunic hanging on a branch. "Then you have come well, for it will be an excellent tournament. The greatest that ever was. I intend to enter, and I intend to win. I am Matthias, the hunter from that hamlet over east of Hamlin a day's pace or so." "I know the place," the piper said calmly. "You may call me Tobias, and I also intend to enter." Matthias eyed his competition. Where is your bow? I have none. A spear? None yet. But I see you have a knife, Matthias noted, wanting to laugh but not allowing himself as he had practiced his patience. Yes, I use it for carving wood, Tobias explained, but sometimes I carve my face by accident. Matthias gave a laugh as Tobias had just scratched his jaw while shaving and drawn a drop of blood. You are a mystery traveler, Matthias said, reaching out a hand to help Tobias up the embankment. Tobias took his hand and felt himself flung through the air to the top of the bank. Well, that was the best handshake I ever had, Tobias admitted. Matthias smiled. He was missing several more teeth than Tobias. They had been knocked out from all his fighting. Perhaps I may put this knife to better use and carve you something while we go upon the road, Tobias offered, drawing the blade on his trousers. Would you like a spoon or a flute, or perhaps a carving of a bear to grace your mantle? I have no mantle. This forest is my home. And so, a spoon, I think, said Tobias, who was genuinely grateful for the offer as he had no wooden spoon for stirring his soups and was obliged to use a stick. And I shall catch us lunch. We shall need some food to gather our strength before the tournament. Matthias volunteered. Let us go on together, and we shall be friends until the tournament. And then, only for a few moments, we shall part ways, and afterward, I hope we shall still be friends. Yes, Tobias replied, though one of us be wed to the princess. They clasped hands by the wrist in the Roman style, signifying their agreement. Then they lifted their sacks, which were light on account of their need to travel quickly. It pleased Tobias to have someone to travel with, and the pair talked as they went upon the road. It was a less used road, and only a few wagons passed them. Some noted Matthias's size and hoped he was not a robber, and some of them recognized him and waved and cheered. I wonder how many have come to try for the princess's hand, Tobias said. Perhaps so many the Duke will make a selection of the most able before the tournament begins. So I have heard, Matthias added. This is his custom in all his contests, so that the best competitors need not compete against the riffraff. Am I riffraff? Tobias asked curiously. Assuredly. Matthias said grimly, without a bow, you cannot hope to match any hunter, and the Duke will not deem you worthy to compete. Then perhaps you'll lend me your bow, Tobias joked. Matthias stopped in the middle of the road and held out his bow to Tobias. If you can draw it, Matthias said, it is yours. I may hunt as well with my spear or my knife. Tobias at first thought his friend was boastful. Are you in earnest? Tobias asked. In earnest means to be serious, and it seemed Matthias was in earnest. Matthias held out the bow. The bowstring was already strung and taut. Tobias held the heavy oaken bow in one hand. It was well shaped and balanced for a right-handed shot. With a nook for the arrow and leather-wrapped grips, with the bow extended in his left, Tobias took the string in his right hand and gave a mighty pull. The oak yielded only so far as his left bicep. He could not get the string to rest against his chin. Tobias let the string slack and passed the bow back. Matthias received it approvingly. It took me 3 months of practice before I could draw it. You nearly got it on your first try. Are you an archer? Tobias shook his head. Just a villager. Then I shall tell you this, said Matthias. When I have drawn this bow and loosed an arrow, if the prey be a stag, at 30 paces or less, the arrow will go straight through the chest and be lost in the brush behind it. Many times I have thought I missed, when I had not, but the arrow pierced the beast in the heart so directly that it fell to the ground as if it were ducking to hide in the grass. A powerful bow will give you an advantage in the tournament, Tobias agreed, for you may loose arrows at a great distance. Matthias nodded. But I'm also fast, in case I run out of arrows and my prey is wounded and I must pursue it on foot. The pair matched pace as they came upon a shallow climb. Shall we race to the top? Matthias said, showing his eagerness to prove himself. After the tournament, I think, Tobias replied. I like my pride better than sore legs. Matthias laughed again. Are you a jester? Tell me, who are you? Tobias wrinkled his brow and considered it. To some, I am the cheer in the morning sun. To others, I am the solace at its going down. Matthias puzzled at this riddle, but in an instant his feet froze, and he put an arm across Tobias's chest, stopping him as well. We shall dine on pheasant. Matthias whispered with a smile. He drew a slim arrow and nocked it. Then, as smooth as water over stone, he pulled the bowstring back to his cheek and sighted. Adjusting for the slight breeze, he took aim and let loose the arrow into a tuft of bowed grass. In the blink of an eye, the arrow disappeared into the grass with a burst of feathers. Matthias hurried to the spot and took his prize, a skewered pheasant. Extracting the arrow from the ground, he found a second bird had been caught through the wing and pinned. 2 in 1, he shouted, wringing its neck to finish the kill. And I didn't even mean to. What luck! Perhaps it is good omen for the tournament. But look, Tobias cried, coming upon the kill. You have found the nest. Eggs too, Matthias proclaimed loudly. That is your catch, and you have 4 eggs to my 2 birds. The companions plucked one of the pheasants and roasted it along the side of the road, then picked up their things and ate a little from the legs and breast as they walked. For what shall we trade with the extra meat? Matthias asked. What is small enough to carry and may aid our quests? Nothing, I think. Tobias answered quickly. We have sufficient in our sacks. True enough, the hunter agreed. Then let us share some of this food with any poor children we meet along the way, Tobias suggested. In doing so, we will please God and bring his blessings. Matthias smiled. That idea feels good in my heart. We must always use our gifts to do for others what Jesus would do if he were here, Tobias explained. For that's what Christians do. They bring joy. Very true, said Matthias, his lip curling into a sly smile as the look of sudden recognition appeared on his features. And now by this clue I have discovered your riddle at last. He stopped again and looked at Tobias. You are the merry piper of Hamlin. Tobias smiled and took a bow. At your service. Now this is something, Matthias declared, rubbing his chin. The magic piper of Hamlin will enter the Duke's tournament. It is a mystery, and I shall not uncover the meaning of it alone. Come, tell me how you plan to win. Tobias shook his head. Not yet, my friend. So they walked on, getting nearer the town of Hanover as the sun dipped low on the horizon behind them. Matthias seemed to be deep in pondering and in earnest about some issue that weighed upon his heart. When he spoke at last, he asked, What do you think of this rumor that goblins live in the hills near Hamlin, and by occasion have taken some of the children? Goblins? Tobias coughed. What goblins? You must have heard of the missing children of Hamlin. Every year they go missing from their homes and are never seen or heard of again. I think the farmers and woodsmen should ward off the wolves better, Tobias answered nervously, wondering if perhaps Matthias had somehow discovered his secret of leading the goblin children out of Hamlin. It is not in winter when the wolves are starved and driven to hunger to approach the humans they fear, Matthias returned, but in spring, when the ice is melted, that is when the children disappear. It's another mystery, Tobias replied dismissively. Then, recalling the terror of his previous night's encounter, he described for Matthias the dark figure he had met and battled outside the bear cave. I think you had some bad mushrooms, Matthias stated plainly. I had only grubs yesternight. Oh, grubs can be just as bad. Tobias breathed. Telling it out loud, it did rather sound like a tavern tale. Tobias pondered the strangeness of it again, while Matthias spun his own tall tales. Once I was tracked by a wolfman, Matthias confessed. The only prey I never caught. Or perhaps you just had some bad meat, Tobias countered with a laugh. Perhaps, Matthias echoed, without his usual laugh. These tales had put a dark spirit on their discourse. Such talk befitted a warm tavern surrounded by comfort and many friends, not a lonely road at dusk. But not 5 paces further, they crested a hill and spied at last the great sight they had traveled far to see. Look, Matthias, we've come to Hanover at last. From the top of the hill, Tobias beheld with wonderment the spread of the bustling town, its walls and bridges and the tall towers of the Duke's castle flying all his colors from the parapets. The entire city was decked for the tournament, with banners and ribbons and painted signs welcoming the challengers and spectators. As he came down to the city with Matthias, Tobias's heart thrilled at the sight. Passing through the open city gates, the late-coming travelers were spied out by a group of boys loafing about behind the guards, who were clearing the path for the closing of the gates at dusk. Upon seeing the hulking mass of the hunter, the boys leapt up and dashed up the street, calling at the top of their voices, Matthias has come! Matthias has come at last! Leaving the extra pheasant and the eggs, with a beggar child sitting near the gate, Tobias and his friend Matthias turned up the street towards the city square, where they came upon a grand festival with gypsy acrobats and fire dancers, musicians and masqueraders, and all manner of merrymakers. The square was set around with tents, and posted by each tent was the flag bearing the crest of its owner. Gathered to each were the fellows of the man who was to enter the next day's tournament. Of a sudden the crowd thronged them, and many open hands were thrust at Matthias in greeting, which received hearty, bone-crunching handshakes. Some congratulated him, while others reminded him of scars he'd given them and offered him an ale. He took a pint and downed the better part of it in one great gulp. Then he raised the cup. The people came to silence to hear what words the great hunter Matthias had to speak. "Good Hanoverians, where is your duke and his fair princess?" he called out. "We are come to greet our host and enter our names in the tournament." The crowd cheered and became a procession, leading across the square up to the head table, where the nobles dined upon a raised platform and watched the merrymaking in the crowd below. Tobias and his friend came at last to the foot of the table and bowed. The duke rose and bid them come up upon the platform, appearing to be in the merriest of moods, especially since Matthias had come. The duke himself had heard of Matthias's fame, and was glad to meet the lad ere the contest began, in hopes that he might have some impression of the young man's character, if he were indeed to win his daughter's hand by taking the grand prize in the tourney. At the steps, Matthias yielded to Tobias, and Tobias to Matthias, until the two came together, hands joined upon his bow. As they came up onto the platform, the crowd cheered so long the duke had to silence them by raising his arm. "Who are you, and how have you come? Speak boldly," the duke commanded. His mustache curled up at the sides in a merry grin. "I am Matthias of the Wild. I have come to enter the tournament by my reputation and by my right. I beg of you to accept my pledge." The duke looked on approvingly. "I have heard of your skill, Matthias, and have wagered against it, perhaps in the folly of my old age, and perhaps to spread my money a bit so you have less to inherit." This joke made the crowd roar with laughter. Beside the duke rose a figure, slender and regal, with flowing strawberry hair held back by a band, and wearing a dress with exquisite beadwork that shimmered in the glow of the torches lighting the square. "But who is his companion?" this entrancingly beautiful woman asked in a voice mild and clear as a bell, so piercing that the sound alone set off the buzzing at once inside Tobias's stomach. It was, of course, the Princess Anna Marie. She had grown up some. Now she was the very portrait of a saintly queen, for she was the most beautiful woman in all of Germany. And that is no exaggeration, for it must be put down in writing as a fact, so that you may understand why Tobias became so nervous to even be in her presence. "I have not come alone," said Matthias, raising the hand of the piper. "See, I have brought with me the merry piper of Hamlin." This announcement also drew a great cheer, as Tobias's fame was easily as great as Matthias's, but for music rather than hunting. Presently the crowd began to clap in time and chant, "Play, play, play." But the crowd was again silenced, this time by a sour cry which turned out to be from the Bishop of Hanover, the very same fellow who was once the priest of Hamlin, who also dined at the head table as the duke's counselor. Tobias looked upon Father Cato's form with a shiver of reluctance. His visage was much the same as it had ever been, scowling and cross. But now he was dressed in finer robes and flourishes of station. On his head he wore a tall bishop's hat, shaped like an enormous tree bud, and held in his hands a staff of judgment topped with the cross. "But see, good Duke," Bishop Cato protested, "the deadline for entry is sunset, and the sun has already set." This elicited great boos from the crowd. "But not yet set in England, I think," Tobias cried at once. Was that in the rules? "I think not," cried the Duke, redoubled with pleasure at seeing the stuffy bishop bested by a jest. "Not yet set in England, by my beard." Again the crowd cheered. "But what about the entry fee?" the bishop whined. "The others offered handsome gifts to secure their places in the tournament. Surely these strangers have brought with them a worthy token." "Davy, I think he did that because he knew they were poor. What's going to happen?" And with this he sneered in a most vile way, marking his imminent victory over the two late arrivals. There was a great silence. Had the two come empty-handed to accept the Duke's hospitality and yet give nothing in return? "We're poor," Tobias said, barely above a whisper, "and we've just given our extra meats and some of the first pheasant eggs of the season to a beggar at the city gates. Assuredly, we have no coins or any wealth to speak of." "Is this true?" the Duke asked, stroking his finely trimmed beard, his regal eyes looking them through like a magistrate beholding certified criminals before their sentencing. Come, we shall see if you are true men and worthy. Each of the last 3 days I have sent my runner to watch the gates for Matthias's coming. In the disguise of a beggar, he was bid wait there from morning until the gates were shut at dusk, to see if you should come. Now where is my runner? Elias! Here, Lord, called the boy as he came through the crowd, moving like a deer in flight, and in one leap cleared 3 ladies and a donkey, and landed upon the stage. And he wasn't even out of breath. To Tobias, something in his eyes or the flexing of his hands gave him the impression of something much more capable and perhaps even more dangerous. He was no mere runner. Yes, you're right, Bridget. We're going to learn about him, and he is not a normal human. But I can't tell you what his special ability is yet. He was addressed directly by the Duke in front of all the gathered crowd. Elias, I charge you speak as honestly as ever you have. Before this day, has any man given a pheasant and some eggs to you while you were disguised as a poor beggar at the city gates? He said this so loudly that even the gypsy dancers at the rear of the crowd paused to listen. Nay, my lord, the boy answered calmly, whilst scratching the side of his hairy neck with his fingers, as peasants often did because of fleas, which in those days made their homes on poor folk as much as on dogs and cats and cattle. Have any of my guests given coin from their purse or shown kindness of any manner to you while you sat upon the ground? Nay, not yesterday, nor the day before, your highness. For once I was spat upon, and oft splattered upon with mud, and once pressed to carry another's burden without pay. But this day, did you freely receive of a pheasant and eggs from these fellows? The Duke questioned with a small gesture toward Tobias and Matthias. Yea. This single word set an excited murmur through the crowd. Elias continued, I took them to my mother. She received them with tears in her eyes, for she's poor and has many children. See, the Duke declared, can any deny these good men a chance to rule this realm, whose hands have shown such kindness when penniless themselves? Nay, roared the crowd, let them compete. Then Matthias spoke out with his booming hunter voice. Though we have not money, we are not unprepared to share. I have 2 hands and 2 feet for dancing, and this, my friend, as sure as the sun rises, has a double set of flutes in his pack. It is true, Tobias answered, pulling from his sack a set of polished wooden pipes set in 2 bowed rows, painted in many colors and decked with colorful ribbons. Then take my hands, good sirs, and join my hands, ladies, and we shall have a dance ere the tournament begins. Tobias put his lips to his pipe, and struck up a happy tune that set the people's feet to dancing, while the other musicians in the crowd fell in beside him, following the magical music of the piper. With this new turn, the night was made merrier than ever before, and the princess had indeed taken no pleasure in the tournament. But only out of an obedient heart had she come to meet her suitors. But now her heart beat fast. Tobias had come, the kindest of all the youths she had ever met. But could he win? Anna Marie was not left to ponder it for long, for at the first tones of the pipe, the ladies at the table joined hands and stood to dance. Anna, when she joined hands with her ladies in waiting, looked up and met Tobias's eyes. She smiled. Her eyes said, I knew you would come. That's the end of this chapter. Next chapter is chapter 10. Join us and tell all your friends about the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. We'll see you next time.